Finally, something Williams' numbers. She is on a record pace in every major category, and then does that.
The sharp scent of disinfectant mingled with something softer, like old paper and faded dreams. As Caitlin Clark walked through the sterile corridors of Sunset Manor Nursing Home in West Des Moines, her trainers squeaking faintly against the linoleum floor, she clutched a visitor's badge in one hand, the number 237 scrawled across the sheet of paper she had been given at reception. She'd spent years chasing glory under bright stadium lights, but nothing had prepared her for this. The quiet dread that pooled in her stomach as she searched for a man who had once believed in her when no one else did. Her childhood basketball coach, Robert "Bobby" Henderson, the man who had taught her how to shoot, how to lead, and, without knowing it, how to hope, was now living out his final days in near anonymity. When she finally pushed open the door to room 237, she found a thin, frail man seated by a window, his trembling hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the drifting October leaves outside. The man who had once commanded gymnasiums full of energy and laughter now looked small against the afternoon light, the faint hum of a television from down the hall his only company. His once steady voice, which had filled countless practices with booming encouragement, had been reduced to a whisper, cracked by Parkinson's disease and softened by time. The room was almost bare. No medals, no trophies. No framed photographs of teams in matching jerseys smiling proudly beside their coach. The only decoration was a single photograph propped carefully behind his bedside lamp. A 12-year-old girl with pigtails and a trophy almost too big for her small hands. The MO Youth League Championship, 2008. Caitlin Clark, his star player, the only memento of a 30-year coaching career. The sight of it made her throat tighten. This was the man who had shaped her foundation, who had seen light in her long before the world ever did. What he didn't know was that Caitlin had been searching for him for years, since the day she tried to send him an invitation to her college graduation, only to find his phone disconnected and his old house sold. The trail had gone cold until a former teammate mentioned seeing him at a nursing home. Looking frail and forgotten, the words had haunted her ever since. Back when Caitlin was 11, all awkward limbs and oversized trainers, Coach Henderson had been the first to see something extraordinary hidden beneath her clumsy determination. He'd spent countless hours after practice showing her how to balance her stance, how to keep her eyes fixed on the rim, and how to believe in the invisible rhythm between body and mind. He drove her to weekend tournaments in his aging Honda Civic, surviving on coffee and granola bars, never once complaining. He'd say, "You've got something special, Clark, but talent without work ethic is just wasted potential. You want to be great? Then do what others won't." Those words had stayed with her long after she'd left Lincoln Middle School. They'd carried her through college championships, Olympic trials, and professional games under the blinding lights of packed arenas. But what she had never realized until this moment was how much that belief had cost him. When Caitlin stepped into his room, Coach Henderson looked up slowly, his eyes watery and distant, the fog of medication and years of isolation dulling their once vibrant spark. For a long moment, there was no recognition, just confusion. Then, as she spoke softly, "Coach Henderson, it's me. It's Caitlin." Something shifted. His lips trembled into a faint smile, and his cloudy eyes widened in disbelief. "Caitlin Clark," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "My star player. What on earth are you doing here?" She pulled a chair beside his wheelchair, close enough to notice the tremor in his hands and the faint smell of institutional soap. "I've been looking for you, Coach," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I wanted to thank you for everything, for believing in me when no one else did." Tears welled in his eyes, and he tried to blink them away with the stubborn pride of a man who had spent a lifetime hiding his vulnerability. "You don't need to thank me, kiddo," he murmured. "You did all the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." But as they talked, Caitlin couldn't ignore the unease that crept into her chest. The room felt too bare for a man who had once been the beating heart of an entire youth league. She noticed his hospital gown instead of clothes, the absence of personal belongings, the nervous way his eyes darted to the door every few minutes. When she gently asked about his family, his daughter Sarah, whom he used to boast about endlessly, he hesitated. "Sarah," he said softly, looking away, "we haven't spoken in years. Life has a way of moving people apart." His words trailed off into the silence that filled the space between them. When she asked how long he'd been living there, he sighed and admitted, 3 years now, since the Parkinson's got bad enough that I couldn't manage on my own." Caitlin's eyes filled with tears. "But why here, coach? Didn't the school or the league help you? You gave everything to those kids." He smiled faintly, the corners of his lips trembling. "Funding dried up. Budgets got cut. I was never good with paperwork or asking for help. Guess I just slipped through the cracks." Later that afternoon, as Caitlin spoke with the nursing staff, she learned the full truth. That Coach Henderson had spent much of his savings supporting underprivileged players, quietly paying for uniforms, travel expenses, and training sessions for children whose families couldn't afford it. Over the years, he had mortgaged his home twice and sold nearly everything he owned, refusing to tell anyone that he was living on the edge of poverty. He'd chosen to invest in dreams that weren't his own, and when his body began to fail, no one knew just how much he had given. Caitlin stood outside his room, her hands trembling as she realized the enormity of his quiet sacrifice. The fame, the accolades, the trophies, all of it had grown from seeds he'd planted selflessly, never asking for anything in return. That evening, as the golden light of sunset spilled across the window, Caitlin returned to his bedside. "You never told me," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his eyes half closed. "Some things don't need telling," he murmured. "Watching you succeed, that was enough." She took his shaking hand in hers, feeling the weight of everything he'd given up. "I'm going to make sure no one forgets you again," she promised. He tried to reply, but the effort exhausted him, and he simply squeezed her hand instead. 3 months later, Sunset Manor's gymnasium was transformed into something extraordinary. A banner hung across the wall, the Henderson Court, dedicated to the coach who believed in every dream. Caitlin had funded the renovation herself, turning the forgotten space into a sanctuary for young athletes. At the dedication ceremony, she spoke softly but firmly, her voice carrying through the hushed crowd. "Every shot I've ever made, every victory I've ever earned, started with a man who refused to stop believing in me." Coach Henderson didn't just teach basketball. He taught courage, humility, and heart. And when she visited his grave months later, a single basketball rested beside the headstone, with a note written in her familiar handwriting. For the man who gave everything so oath as she stood there in the quiet breeze, Caitlin realized that true greatness isn't measured in medals or fame. It's measured in the hearts we lift and the lives we change without expecting anything in return. And though the world might forget the names of those who plant the seeds, their
couple of big posts on the interior. That's not going to be the case with this group this year. Wilson sticks it.
The air in the nursing home felt heavy that afternoon, laced with disinfectant and the faint scent of loneliness, as Caitlin Clark sat across from her old coach, seeing in his frail frame the remnants of the man who had once shaped her entire destiny. When Coach Henderson confessed that his children no longer spoke to him, that his wife had left because he loved basketball more than his family, Caitlin felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. Every late-night practice, every extra hour he'd stayed behind to help her perfect her shot, had come at a price she'd never known he was paying. His voice trembled but carried an unmistakable truth as he said, "It wasn't your job to worry about me, kid. It was my job to make you better, and I'd do it all again." Those words hit her harder than any game day loss ever could. Before leaving, he reached for a small photograph, her, age 12, holding a trophy nearly her own size. The edges were worn from decades of touch. "I've watched every one of your games," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "Every college final, every WNBA match. I tell the nurses I taught you to shoot, but they think I'm just some old man telling stories." Tears stung Caitlin's eyes as she held his shaking hands. "You're not just my coach," she said softly. "You're the reason I'm here, and I won't let you be forgotten."